The crowd was laughing. Not politely. Not quietly. They were laughing the way people do when something makes them uncomfortable and they choose cruelty over kindness. A young woman sat at an old upright piano in the corner of a small London bar. Her name was Clare Donovan. She was 24 years old. She was a waitress. And tonight, for reasons she was still trying to understand, she was supposed to be a performer. Her hands were shaking. The opening notes of Let It Be came out wrong, too slow, too uneven, the melody stumbling where it should have soared. A table near the back laughed louder. Someone made a comment. More laughter followed. Clare kept her eyes down and kept playing, the way a person walks faster when they hear footsteps behind them. She was not performing anymore. She was surviving. She had no idea that 12 feet away, in a corner booth near the window, a man in a dark cap was sitting very still. He had come alone that night. No security. No entourage. Just a quiet man who liked small rooms and live music, nursing a drink and watching the stage. He had been watching since the moment Clare sat down. And now, as the laughter in the bar grew louder, he set down his glass. He did not look away from her. He stood up. If you love stories about unexpected kindness and the moments that change ordinary lives forever, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell right now. Because what you are about to hear is the story of the night Paul McCartney walked toward a stranger's piano and reminded a room full of strangers what that song was actually for. The information in this video is drawn from historical records, documented interviews, and archival sources. Some elements have been dramatized for narrative purposes and may not represent complete factual accuracy. AI-assisted visuals and narration are used as storytelling tools to reconstruct the spirit of the era as faithfully as possible. To understand what happened inside that bar on Greek Street, you need to know who Clare Donovan was. Not the waitress carrying trays across a sticky floor. The girl she had been before London swallowed her whole. Clare grew up in Salford, just outside Manchester, in a household where money was always counted carefully and never stretched far enough. Her father worked rotating shifts at a textile factory. Her mother cleaned office buildings 3 nights a week. They were not unhappy people. But they were tired people, and the tiredness showed. The one thing in their home that never felt heavy was music. Her father sang in the kitchen. Her mother hummed while she worked. Music was the language the family used when words ran out. When Clare was 7 years old, her aunt could no longer keep an old upright piano in her flat. There was no room. So it arrived at the Donovan house on a Tuesday afternoon, carried in by 2 men who knocked the door frame getting it through. Clare walked around it for 2 days before she touched it. Then she sat down and never really got up again. She taught herself entirely by ear. No lessons, no sheet music, no teacher. She listened to songs on the radio and found them again with her fingers. By the time she was 12, she could play full arrangements from memory. Her music teacher at school noticed and encouraged her to pursue it seriously. Clare already knew she wanted to. She had known since the first Tuesday the piano arrived. Let It Be became her song. Not because it was easy, it was not. But because something in it matched a feeling she could not name. A kind of calm that existed on the other side of something hard. She played it in the evenings after homework. She played it when her parents argued. She played it the night her father came home and told them the factory was cutting hours. It was the song she reached for when the world felt like too much. At 18, she applied to the Royal Northern College of Music. The rejection letter arrived on a Thursday. She read it twice, folded it carefully, and put it in a drawer. She never took it out again. She moved to London at 22, believing something would be different there. It was not. There was a small flat she could barely afford and a job at a bar in Soho called the Anchor. The music school dream faded, the way dreams do when survival takes up all the space. But she never stopped playing. She found pianos in churches, in community halls, in empty rehearsal rooms left unlocked by mistake. She played alone, and Let It Be was always the last song before she closed the lid and went home. She had never played it for an audience. Until tonight, she had never needed to. It was a Friday night in October 1993. The Anchor was full by 7. The kind of full where every table had people and the bar 3 deep, and the noise level made conversation feel like effort. Friday nights at the Anchor ran on live music. It was the one thing that kept regulars coming back and new customers staying longer than one drink. The scheduled performer was a jazz guitarist named Marcus Webb. He had played the Anchor every Friday for 8 months. He was reliable, talented, and well-liked by the regular crowd. At 5 o'clock that evening, he called the bar. He had a fever. He could not come in. He was sorry. Gerald Hicks, the bar owner, took the call in his small office behind the kitchen. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long moment after Marcus hung up. A Friday crowd with no music meant complaints. It meant refunds. It meant losing the kind of evening that paid for slower ones. He walked out into the bar and looked around at his staff. His eyes stopped on Clare. He remembered something she had mentioned once, casually, in passing, that she could play piano. He had not thought about it again until this moment. He pulled her aside near the kitchen door, away from the noise. He explained the situation quickly. He asked if she could cover. Clare shook her head before he finished the sentence. She was a waitress. She had never performed. Not once. Not ever. Gerald offered double her shift wage. She said no. He offered triple. She thought about the electricity bill she had ignored for 3 weeks. She thought about the final notice sitting on her kitchen table. She thought about the cold of her flat the past 2 mornings. She said yes. Gerald's relief was instant and visible. Clare walked toward the piano feeling nothing like relief. Now, while Clare was crossing that room with a handwritten list of songs and a heart that was already racing, there was something happening in the corner booth near the window that nobody in the bar knew about. A man had arrived at the Anchor sometime around 7:30. He came in quietly, chose the corner seat with his back to the wall, ordered a drink, and pulled his cap low. He had done this dozens of times in dozens of small London venues across the years. He liked the anonymity. He liked the sound of live music without the obligation of being seen. Nobody recognized him. The bar was loud and distracted, and he was just a man in a cap nursing a drink in the corner. But it was Paul McCartney. He was 51 years old. It had been a difficult year, quieter than most, more interior. He had lost people. He had spent more time than usual alone with his thoughts and his music, circling things he did not yet have words for. Small venues helped. They reminded him why the whole thing had started. He was watching the stage when Clare sat down at the piano. He watched her arrange her notes. He watched her take a breath. He watched her place her hands on the keys and choose her song. When the first notes of Let It Be came out uneven and slow, Paul McCartney went very still. The crowd began to murmur. Then someone laughed. Then more. Clare's jaw tightened. She kept playing. She had no idea that the man who had written that song, who had written it for his mother, who had carried it for 30 years, was sitting 12 feet away, watching every second. If this story is already reaching something in you, take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel. Stories like this one, every single week, about kindness, about music, and about the moments that change everything. The first verse fell apart quietly. A wrong note in the third bar. Then another in the fifth. The timing loosened and never recovered. Claire was playing from memory, but fear had gotten between her fingers and the keys, and what came out was a shadow of the song, recognizable but broken, the way a familiar face looks wrong in bad light. The crowd did not go silent the way a kind crowd might. It went louder. Conversations that had paused when she sat down resumed with less restraint. A table of 4 near the front was laughing openly, not at anything specific, just at the general shape of the situation. A woman at the bar turned back to her drink. Someone near the middle of the room said something that made the people around him laugh. Claire heard it without hearing the words. She felt it land the way those things always land, somewhere below the ribs. She reached the bridge and lost her place entirely. Her fingers stopped. 10 seconds of silence, not the good kind, not the held breath kind, but the empty kind, the kind that fills immediately with the sound of other people's conversations. She sat with her hands in her lap staring at the keys. The bar carried on around her as though she had already left the stage. She started again from the beginning. It was worse the second time. When fear takes hold of a person's hands, repetition does not fix it. She played the opening bars slower, more carefully, and the extra care made every wrong note more obvious. The laughter near the front table grew. Claire's shoulders pulled inward. Her chin dropped slightly toward her chest. Across the room, Paul McCartney had not moved. His friend, the one person who had come with him that evening, said something quietly. Paul did not respond. He was watching Claire with the kind of attention that has no performance in it. Just watching. His drink sat untouched in front of him. He knew this feeling. Not as a memory to be described, but as something that lived in the body. He had been on those stages. Not the big ones, the early ones. The Cavern Club in 1961, playing lunchtime sets for factory workers who ate their sandwiches and talked through every song. Nights when the equipment failed and the crowd jeered and John would lean over and say something sharp and funny and they would keep playing because stopping felt worse than continuing. He remembered the specific weight of a room that has decided not to listen. He remembered what it cost to keep going anyway. But there was something else holding him in that chair, and it had to do with the song. He knew what Let It Be was. He knew where it had come from, the dream, his mother's face, her voice telling him to let it be. He knew what it cost to write it and what it meant to play it. And watching this young woman play it badly in front of a laughing room, trying again from the beginning with shaking hands, he understood something clearly. She was not playing it badly because she did not care. She was playing it badly because she cared more than the room deserved. He stood up. His friend reached across the table and touched his arm. Paul looked at him once, briefly, and gently moved his hand aside. He reached up and removed his cap as he rose, not as a gesture, not for effect, the way a man removes his hat without thinking when he is about to do something that matters. 3 people near the bar saw his face. One woman put her hand over her mouth. Nobody spoke. The noise of the room continued, oblivious. Paul walked toward the piano. Claire's eyes were closed. She was on the 3rd bar of her second attempt, jaw set, playing through it by will alone. She did not hear him approach. She did not feel him until the bench shifted slightly under his weight as he sat down beside her. She opened her eyes. She turned. Paul McCartney was sitting next to her at the piano. He was looking at her with a calm, steady expression, no performance in it, no condescension, no drama. He looked like a man who had simply arrived somewhere he needed to be. He placed his hands on the keys. "From the beginning," he said quietly. "Together this time." He played the opening notes of Let It Be. The real version. The right version. The version that had lived inside him for 30 years. And the sound that came out of that old upright piano in the corner of a Soho bar on a Friday night in October was nothing like what the room had been hearing. It was warm and certain and full, the way the song was always meant to sound. The bar went silent. Not gradually. All at once. The way a room goes silent when something happens that language has not caught up to yet. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to mouths. The table near the front that had been laughing went completely still. Every person in that room understood simultaneously, without yet being able to say why, that something was happening that they would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe to people who had not been there. Claire's hands were still on the keys. She had not moved since the moment Paul sat down. For a second that felt much longer than a second, she could not process what was happening. The mind does that sometimes. When reality steps too far outside of what it had prepared for, it simply pauses. She sat there, frozen, while Paul played the opening bars alone. Then he nodded at her. Once. Small. The way a person holds a door open without making a thing of it. Claire placed her fingers on the keys beside his. Her first notes were unsteady. Her hands still carried the fear from everything that had come before, the laughter, the silence, the starting again. But Paul's playing did not waver. It stayed even and warm beneath hers, like a floor that holds no matter what. She found the melody again inside his rhythm. Not perfectly. Not cleanly. But she found it. Something shifted inside her. It did not happen all at once. It happened the way feeling returns to a cold hand, gradually, from the inside out. Her shoulders dropped away from her ears. Her jaw unclenched. Her fingers began to move with something that was not quite confidence, but was no longer pure fear. She was still not a polished performer. But she was no longer a person enduring something. She was a person playing. Paul glanced at her once, briefly, as they moved through the first chorus. There was a small expression on his face, not a smile exactly, but something close. Quiet acknowledgement. She caught it and held onto it like a handhold on a steep climb. The bar remained completely silent. The table near the front that had been laughing sat, without speaking, watching the stage with expressions that had nowhere left to go except open. The woman at the bar who had turned her back was now facing forward. The man who had made the comment that landed below Claire's ribs was looking at the piano with something that might have been shame. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the Anchor on Greek Street that Friday night in October 1993 was an old upright piano being played by a young waitress and the man who had written the song they were playing together. They reached the final chorus. Paul took the lead fully, his left hand steady on the bass notes, his right hand carrying the melody forward with the ease of 30 years of living inside that song. Claire played alongside him, harmony, support, presence. She was not carrying the song. She was part of it. That was enough. That was more than enough. When the last note faded, there was a half-second of complete stillness. Then the bar came apart. Not polite applause. Not the measured clapping of an audience doing what is expected. People were on their feet. Someone near the back let out a sound that was not quite a word. A woman 2 tables from the front was crying, not dramatically, just quietly, with her hand pressed flat against her chest as though something had moved inside it, and she needed to hold it there. The noise of it filled the small room and kept building, the way water rises, until it was louder than anything the Anchor had held in a long time. Paul stared. He turned to face the room. And then he did something that nobody in that bar forgot for the rest of their lives. He stepped back from the piano, extended one arm toward Claire, and said, clearly, so the whole room could hear, "This young lady. She started this." The room doubled. Claire was standing now, though she could not have said exactly when she had risen. Tears were moving down her face, but she was not aware of them. She was aware of the sound, the particular sound of a room full of strangers deciding together that they had been wrong, and that correcting it felt like this. Paul leaned close to her. The noise of the room made it private even in public. He spoke quietly, close enough that only she could hear. "Your instinct for that song was right," he said. "It was always right. Don't let anyone take that from you. Keep playing." He reached into his jacket pocket and pressed a small folded piece of paper into her hand. She looked down at it. He was already stepping back, already preparing to leave the way he had always preferred to leave, without ceremony, without a scene, while the room was still loud enough to cover his exit. "Call that number," he said. "Tell them Paul sent you." He gave the room one final wave, easy, unhurried, the wave of a man who has always been more comfortable giving attention than receiving it. Then he moved toward the side door, his cap back on his head, and stepped out into the October night before the crowd fully understood that he was leaving. The door closed. The bar surged toward the stage. Gerald, the owner, stood in the middle of his establishment with both hands on top of his head, unable to form a single word. Claire stood at the piano with a folded piece of paper in one hand and the sound of an entire room in her ears, and she did not move for a long time. If stories like this one mean something to you, stories about kindness, about music, about what happens when one person chooses to show up for another, subscribe to this channel right now. Every week, a story worth remembering. Paul McCartney never spoke publicly about that night. No interview mentioned it. No journalist ever reported it. It remained exactly the kind of story he preferred, the kind that belonged to the person it happened to, not to the person who made it happen. He slipped back into the October night the way he had arrived. Quietly, without needing anything from it. Gerald Hicks locked up the anchor sometime after midnight. He told the story to his wife when he got home, and she did not fully believe him. He told it again for years after that, to anyone who would listen, always ending with the same line. "The night I almost cancelled the music." Claire sat at the piano long after the crowd had thinned. The bar emptied slowly around her. She held the folded piece of paper in both hands and read what was written on it. A name. A phone number. A music school in North London. And beneath that, in plain handwriting, 4 words. "Tell them Paul sent you." She called the number on Monday morning. She called it standing in her cold kitchen, with the final notice still on the table and her hands steadier than they had been in years. She did not become a recording artist. She did not go on to perform on bigger stages, or release albums, or build the kind of life that gets written about. What she became was a piano teacher. First at the music school in North London, then privately, in a small room in her flat, with a second-hand upright piano against the wall and a chair beside it for whoever needed to sit down and learn. She taught for 20 years. Hundreds of students came through that small room. Children mostly, but adults too, people who had always wanted to play and had kept putting it off until one day they stopped putting it off. And every single time a student sat at that piano and froze, hands shaking, face tight, ready to give up, Claire told them a story. About a Friday night in October 1993. About a small bar in Soho. About a laughing crowd and a song that came out wrong and a man in a cap who sat down uninvited and said 4 words that changed everything. That was the last night Claire Donovan ever played out of fear. Every time after that, She played for something else entirely. Let us go back one final time to that small bar on Greek Street. A young woman sits at an old upright piano. The crowd is laughing. Her hands are shaking. The song is falling apart note by note. She is 24 years old and she is doing the bravest thing she has ever done. She is continuing anyway. She does not know that the man who wrote the song she is playing is 12 feet away. She does not know that anything is about to change. She only knows the next note, and the one after that, and the stubborn decision to keep going even when everything in the room is telling her to stop. That decision mattered. Not because it was witnessed by someone famous, but because it was the kind of decision that defines a person, the quiet choice to keep going when stopping would be easier and nobody would blame you for it. Paul McCartney did not save Clare Donovan's career that night. He saved something smaller and more important than a career. He saved her relationship with the thing she loved most. He sat beside her and he played, and in doing so he said the only thing that needed saying, that her love for the music was real, that it was worth something, and that one room full of strangers laughing could never take that from her. The ripple moved outward the way those things always do. Quietly. Without announcement. Through 20 years of lessons and hundreds of students, and every person who sat in that small room and learned that the wrong note is not the end of the song. Somewhere tonight, in a room somewhere, someone is sitting at a piano for the first time. Their hands are shaking. They are about to play something imperfectly, and it is going to be the most important thing they do all year. From the beginning. Together this time. 4 words spoken quietly in a loud room on an October night in 1993, and they are still moving, still carrying forward, long after the bar fell silent and the piano went still. That was Paul McCartney. Not the voice, not the fame, not the 50 years of sold-out stages. The man who sat down. Have you ever been shown unexpected kindness at exactly the right moment? Let us know in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.